Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. You might have noticed that there are a lot of podcasts out there. It seems like everyone has something to say and a podcast to say it on. I've listened to most leadership podcasts, and I have many favorites, but there is one that really stands out. My guest today is Jeff Aiken, and his show is the one podcast I look forward to every time. As it turns out, Jeff is a former submariner, which may explain why I love his leadership analysis. This podcast is also well produced. It's not just some guy with a microphone. The quality is on par with some of the best podcasts out there, and the subject matter is very unique. In fact, I believe he is going where no podcast has gone before. And yes, that's a Star Trek reference. I'll explain in a bit. This is going to be a fun show, and I'm excited to be able to talk to Jeff. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jeff Aiken. Jeff is a former submariner who has more than 20 years of leadership experience in both the public and private sectors. He's also a motivational speaker, voiceover artist, and a podcast host. In fact, I think Jeff has one of the most unique leadership podcasts on the planet, and maybe other planets as well. He is the host and creator of the Starfleet Leadership Academy podcast. And if you're thinking Star Trek, you're correct. In this podcast, Jeff breaks down episodes of Star Trek and points out all of the important leadership lessons. You don't have to be a Star Trek fan to really appreciate the creativity of what he's doing. This is my favorite leadership podcast right now, and I'm excited to have Jeff on the show to talk about it. So, Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, John. It's a real pleasure and honor to be on this podcast with you. Thanks.
Well, it's so good to finally meet you and have you on the show because I'm so excited about what you've been doing on your podcast. So it's going to be great to talk about the podcast and a little bit about your background and how you came about developing this podcast because I think it's fantastic. So let's start a little bit. You were a submariner like myself. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you get into the world of submarining? And is that where you got your first taste of leadership?
Well, it wasn't really the first taste of leadership. I got involved leadership really young, actually, and that carried through high school. I was in student council. I was the student body president. And with a name like mine, right? How can you not? I mean, who's not Aiken for Jeff Aiken, right? Totally works at the high school level. Perfect. Don't know if that's going to translate well into the real world, but I've always had a passion for serving, and that's ultimately partly what led to me enlisting in the Navy. And I joined the submarine service partly because they paid you an extra $75 a month. And back in my day, that was not bad.
Right.
But I'll tell you what I learned on my boat. I was on a Los Angeles class fast attack, the USS La Jolla, beautiful boat. What I learned there really shaped my vision for leadership forever. Because as you well know, when you're on a boat, when you're on a submarine, no one person is any more important than anyone else. I remember when I was doing my quals, I was qualifying to do dive and drive. That's the first watch you learn out of the galley, and that's something you want to learn as fast as possible. But you learn how to dive and drive the boat. And sitting directly to my left is the cob, the chief of the boat, arguably the most important person on the whole. The guy knows everything. And I'll never forget him telling me, it's probably the second watch I stood there when I was still qualifying. And he says, if it ever goes down and something bad happens here, first thing I do is leave my post and come to yours, because if we can't dive and drive this boat, we can't do anything. Mm-hmm. That's mind-blowing, right? So here's like one of the top leaders, one of the top positions in our organization telling me that this most basic job that I do is the first thing he's going to jump on. Mm-hmm. And that really shaped my view of leadership forever.
Yeah, on the boat, everybody's important. Everybody has to do their mission. Everybody depends on everybody else. And I think that's why the qualification process is so difficult, because we want to make sure that every position has somebody in that position that knows what to do, standard operating and also in an emergency, because your life is literally depending on the person next to you. And what's interesting is, the more senior you get, you still have to qualify on every junior watch station as well. So the more senior you are, you still can step down and take over the duty of, like you said, the chief of the boat taking over the helmsman or the plainsman position, because they're qualified, and qualified means you're qualified to be able to do all those watch stations. I think it's a unique thing. And, I don't know, what did you notice when you came out of the military and you started working in the public and private sector? Did you see that same level of, everybody in it together, or was it slightly different?
Slightly, yeah. And if slightly means dramatically different, yeah. It makes me think of, so one of my first jobs when I came out of the Navy was with movie theaters. I ran movie theaters for a lot of years, and which is a fascinating industry that I think unfortunately is suffering from this pandemic
Big time.
A lot more than others. But my boss was really, really big on being the boss, right? And Mr. This and Miss That, and very into protocol. When I was on the boat, my divo, my division officer, is a lieutenant. I remember that. And I remember his name was Greg. If you paid me $1 million, I couldn't remember his last name because I called him Greg, right? And I remember I was stationed in San Diego, and we went down to the 32nd Street base to pick up some supplies one time, just he and I. And we're walking down the pier. And I don't know, 5-10 minutes, we're walking down there, and he just kind of elbows me and he says, Aiken, you better start saluting the officers around here. They take that stuff real serious over here. And like, I was like, wow. Right. And that's what I experienced when I started working in the quote, the civilian world out there, was your title matters to people. And, I think a lot about, you go to work, right? If you put your way back hat on and you remember those cube jungles that, everybody's got their cubie they work in, except the managers, right? The supervisors might be out there with you, but you got your directors, you got your administrators, your leads, your whatever. They got these nice offices. Some of them have windows. They've all got doors, and there's that real separation. That the status means something to those people. It doesn't mean anything like to the work, right? It's important to those people that have the status. It's very different.
It's very different. There's a separation there. And I think one thing that's really unique as a submariner or being on a submarine is that there's no real separation. I remember I went and toured an aircraft carrier, the USS Saratoga, with a friend of mine, and we were walking up this stairway up to where there was what they called officer country. That's where the wardroom was and the officer berthing was. And there was a big mirror there, and there was a sign that said, "Prepare yourself, you're going into officer country." And it was almost like an insult. Like, you have, you Mr. Enlisted, you've got to step up your game. You're going into officer country now. This is a special place. And I just laughed when I saw it. And my buddy was a submariner as well. We both laughed. We're like, yeah, that doesn't exist on a submarine. I mean, the tight spaces, we were all in it together, right? I mean, we wore the same uniform. And maybe with the exception of a belt, we ate the same food. When we were deployed, we were all deployed. We stood watch together. Now, officers, senior enlisted, junior enlisted, we were in it together. Everybody was in it. And I think sometimes in companies we miss out. We think that the managers are more important than the people on the front line. And the truth of the matter is, the people on the front line are actually more important, because they're interfacing with the customer. They're building the product. They're adding value. And the manager is in his office doing emails, right? So we put the value in the wrong place a lot of times in companies. That's my observation. I did 22 years in corporate America, and all I saw was, I'm special, I have a corner office, versus, really who was special was the people on the front lines.
Right. Absolutely. And I think we experienced that, right? So like on my little boat, little Fast Attacks, those Los Angeles classes were not big. I think if I remember right, we had 126 people on my boat, full complement. And the officers had this tiny little meeting room that I keenly remember stripping and waxing the deck with a sponge.
Because that's what you do in the Navy.
Exactly, right?
Strip and wax.
I joke a lot that, I was in Clinton's Navy, so our enemy was dirt. And,
right.
and we won. We won.
Won the war on dirt.
But the other side of the wall from that little meeting room they had was where we had the trash compactor, like the smell. Well, one of the smelliest place. I did do one round in the sand tank, but but one of the grossest places on the boat was on the other side of the wall. There's no status, right? And that meeting room they had was functional. They needed to go in there to put to talk about the orders and the plan and put the plan of the day together and get that out. It wasn't a status. Look at my special area, not by any means.
Well, and what some people who've not served on a submarine may not know is that the wardroom table is actually the operating room too. If anyone gets hurt, that's actually where they do operations, right there on that table. So,
yep,
yeah. So it's cross functional, right?
Everything on a boat is
multifunctional, I guess. So let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us about your podcast. Now, I do a leadership podcast. I'm doing an interview format. You decided to do a leadership podcast, and you decided to bring in the world of Star Trek. So first of all, why did you decide to do a podcast? Why leadership and why Star Trek, and why combine the two? Because I think it's fascinating and I love what you're doing.
Well, thank you. First off, thank you. I think, I like to joke that I'm a man that lives in the United States that has a computer, so I have to have a podcast, right?
By law, absolutely.
It ships with iMovie, GarageBand, and a podcast. That's
and a podcast, yes.
But no, what hit me, because I joke, but really, I think that's a thing a lot of people want to do. But I've had the privilege of working in a lot of industries in my time. For almost 20 years, I've worked in professional wrestling. I worked as I did wrestle a little bit. God bless those guys. My body's not cut out for that. But I worked as a broadcaster, right, doing the commentary, the play-by-play, things like that. Through that, I got into the world of voiceover acting, and that's an exciting job that I get to do, and have met some cool people and done some really neat projects. But what bothered me was I was always portraying someone else's thought, someone else's idea. And man, I've got a lot of ideas up here. I have a lot of experiences that have really formed my view on leadership. So I go in, step one on any new project, right, is know the landscape. So do your research. And I did. And guess what? There are a lot of podcasts about leadership out there.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And what I love about your podcast, though, is it's got that unique bent, right? Because I think, as we've talked about now for a while, coming as submariners, we have a different view on the world. And we have a different view, or at least experience, that's shaped our view on leadership. And so it's one of those things where you have to have that special value prop that makes you different, than the massive, massive podcasts that are out there. So I thought, well, I don't really have that so much. Maybe I'll just do a Star Trek podcast, right? Because I love Star Trek. Like, I'm that guy. And then you do that search and, oh my God, the world does not need another Star Trek podcast. But I actually read an article a couple of years ago, and I feel bad. I should have done a little more research, but there was a general who stated that some of the greatest military lessons he ever learned were from Star Trek. And so I thought to myself, oh my God. And as you said at the beginning there, you watch Captain Picard in action or something, you're like, that guy's smooth. That was good. That was a great choice. So I'm like, let's do this, man. Let's watch these episodes and start pulling leadership ideas out of them. And so I watched a couple just to make sure like there was actually content here. And like mind-blowing amounts of content.
It's amazing. They're filled with it, and I think I was talking to you earlier. My wife and I decided to watch The Next Generation, just because they're on now on Netflix and Amazon. So we're kind of going through each season, and just for fun, something to do. We had watched it when before we had children. We were younger. We watched a lot of the reruns, and we enjoyed the show. But we sit there and we talk about all the leadership lessons, and we're like, oh, that was great, what he did there, or what she said there. Oh, they spent that extra amount of time just caring for that person. There's all these really interesting leadership lessons. And my wife kept saying, you got to write about that. You got to write about that. I'm like, I don't know how many people are watching a show like this. And this is an older, this is an older show. And then I bumped into your podcast, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I was talking about. So I really think you're really finding a lot of gems. At least all the episodes I've listened to, you found a lot of really good leadership gems in these as you watch these episodes.
Yeah, it's been challenging. I didn't know how to dive in. There's over 700 episodes of original Star Trek out there,
Wow.
and they're producing more now. And so like, where do you even start? And so I started with just the live action. So when I started this, Star Trek Discovery was just a rumor when I first had the first idea for this. And so everything was produced, all the series were done. So I'm like, I'll start with the pilots, start with the first episode. And my first construct for this is I would watch all of season 1 of all of the episodes, at one time, sort of thing. So I'm going to watch all of Next Generation, all of the original series, all of Voyager, etc. But then I realized like the first season of a lot of Star Trek isn't that good.
No, yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if I can soldier through all this. And so I created this spreadsheet. I have all the episodes in it. I wrote a little macro where I hit a little button and it pops up a random episode, and that's going to be the next one I watch.
Oh, that's great.
And, so I can dive in, watch it, start pulling all the leadership lessons out of it.
I think it's great. And now that I follow you, I subscribe to your podcast. So now I see the episode you're doing, and I refuse to listen to your podcast till I go watch the episode, because I really want to see the lessons or follow you as you go through the lessons of it. So I really think that if you do that, I mean, I really encourage those of you who follow this podcast, I absolutely love this, is go watch the episode. It's easy to find, right? They're on all the streaming services. Watch the episode, then listen to the podcast, and you really get a lot more out of it than just listening to the podcast too. You really get a lot of color in things. Like I would say, for example, some observations I see, you mentioned it too, and it's like, oh, that was not good, and I hear you comment on it as well. So,
because
I
think
really
that's
enjoy
key
that.
thing.
Yeah.
Key thing, right? Like we've talked a bit now about how there's some incredible leadership lessons. It's important to note that some great lessons are what not to do as much as they are what to do. And Star Trek is full of those as well.
Right. So you're a fan of Star Trek. So what, if you're looking at all the different episodes or the different, there are, I guess, different genres of Star Trek, I guess, that they put together. So what are some captains that you like so far, and ones that you think have some work to do? Because I think I might know an answer to that. So,
right? Yeah. If you listen to a couple episodes, I think what's interesting is I've watched all of Star Trek a couple of times. So I am that big of a nerd. And so I walk in with a lot of biases about who I'm going to like and who I'm not going to like. And I try to own those on the podcast, right? Like Deep Space Nine is my Star Trek. And I tell you that when we get to an episode, but I work hard in my analysis to be as objective as I can. And I can say, from a leadership standpoint, while I've been impressed with Deep Space Nine, Commander and later Captain Sisko, I think it also has not as much in it. There's a lot of different story. However, I've been able to pull out a lot of lessons around lean, some Six Sigma stuff out of there. They do some really great stuff around, because they're just about operations in a lot of ways. You
had in one of your episodes, you talked about a Gemba walk, and my first episode on this podcast is talking about Gemba, and I'm like, oh, great, we're
Dude, I'll tell you what,
we're connected somehow.
Gemba walks changed my life. Like, and look it up, people. If you don't know a Gemba walk, it's just literally going to the place where the work happens, and that will change your world,
change everything. Yes,
but Sisko does that in the first episode of Deep Space Nine. It's like, look at this. Like, he's going there and he's looking and he's getting his hands dirty, and like, this is great. And then you've got captains like Janeway on Voyager, who, and we'll get into this in some later episodes, but she doesn't have a support system. She's meant to be, I think of captains in terms of like a general, maybe district manager kind of thing, but there's always infrastructure above that. There's none for her. She has nobody to check in with.
Right.
And, and so I'm looking forward to pulling out the lessons where she has a very distinct vision. She has defined her values and knows the mission of Starfleet. And so when you're in those rough situations, like Voyager finds itself in, how do you stick to the vision, the mission, your values, when it could compromise everything for you, right? But there's going to be a lot of examples. But you want to talk about not great. So Star Trek Enterprise, it's a great series.
Yes.
Totally go watch it. I've only been able to watch so far in the thing 2 episodes out of the first season. So I want to give credit to Captain Archer. I know there's an arc, but man, he starts out rough.
It's bad. I watched an episode last night. I don't know where. I just decided to look at him since your podcast came out. I went back and watched him, and he's got some challenges in the first season.
Yeah, he, I think it's a thing, and maybe this is a modern piece. Maybe I don't think it is modern. Like, as I'm saying this, I'm even questioning myself. But leading with emotional intelligence, right? I think we just have better words for it now.
Right.
We used to talk about empathy or active listening or things like that, which are parts of that. But if you want to see zero emotional intelligence, you watch Captain Archer.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Deep Leadership is brought to you by Strikeforce Energy. Strikeforce Energy is a veteran-owned company founded by a Navy SEAL, and their products are all made in the USA. Strikeforce Energy is a liquid flavor pack that you can add into any beverage. It has 0 calories, 0 carbs, and 0 sugar. Each pack contains 80 milligrams of caffeine. Strikeforce Energy is offering a discount to all the listeners of Deep Leadership. Go to strikeforceenergy.com and enter the discount code I Have the Watch, one word, for a 20% discount on every order. Deep Leadership is also brought to you by my Amazon best-selling book, I Have the Watch, Becoming a Leader Worth Following. This book is filled with 23 short stories on how you can become a more effective leader. It's super easy to read, and most people finish it in less than 2 hours. Go to ihavethewatch.com and click the large orange button for signed copies. Enter the discount code IHaveTheWatch, one word, at checkout for 20% off your order, and domestic shipping is always free. What about Captain Picard? Now, he's what are your assessments of him so far?
So through the random episode generator, I haven't been able to watch a lot of the generation, but I've got one. So when this is coming out, in fact, coming pretty soon. It really, in a lot of ways, it's going to be hard to not call him kind of the pinnacle, the example to reach for as a leader. But I think what is different from him, or what's going to be interesting to learn from him, is he is very much about that separation, right? He is the captain, and and in fact, if people are familiar with the series, the very last scene of The Next Generation, spoiler alert, is Picard finally joining the crew in their poker game that they play. And he never did, because he always tried. So that it's not right, it's not wrong, right? It's his style, it's how he does it. What I think is going to be interesting to look at is how he still creates those personal connections with the people on his crew, despite maintaining that professional distance.
It's almost as if, I kind of equate it to, the smaller submarines were led by commanders, lieutenant commanders, and the larger ones, the Tridents, were 06s. We had a full captain that was our commanding officer. And I think it's almost like Picard is that 06, he's the more senior guy that has been there, done that. Whereas maybe some of the other episodes have the ships are smaller, the crews are smaller, and you're getting more of a Captain Kirk, who's going to jump in action and take charge. And, he's always in the fray, right?
He is, but in the very first episode of the original series with Kirk, it's called "Where No Man Has Gone Before." It was the pilot that actually got them signed. There's this incredible scene, and I'll just really quick talk about it. But it's what we were just talking about. His helmsman goes down, and in the blink of an eye, he slips from the captain's chair into the helmsman seat, right there, without skipping a beat. And then Spock over in the science department bumps him out of there. In a heart, like it happens in a blink of an eye. He jumps in to take over. Spock comes in to take over for him, because they understand the importance of the job and where they are in that moment. The science station is unimportant entirely, but you need your captain in there, calling the shots. Kirk, so far, I've only been able to review a couple episodes, but there's a vision of like William Shatner and Kirk out there in the world that just doesn't survive any scrutiny. Like if you watch any of the original series, he's not that guy. Like I'm very impressed with him as a leader in what I've seen so far.
Okay. So I haven't watched. Now I think you've said on the podcast that you used to watch the original Star Trek with your mom. Is that right?
Yeah. So growing up,
those episodes.
I did. Yeah. Growing up, she was, before I was born, she was a fan, and that was a big thing growing up with her, was watching it. And I remember as a kid when The Next Generation came on the air, like that was a thing. And and she actually passed away just a couple of months ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Had a stroke. Thank you. But the last thing she and I did together was watch an episode of The Next Generation.
Wow.
Ensigns of Command which is an okay episode, but it's always going to have a special place in my heart now because that's got to watch it with her. But she really brought me into the world of Star Trek.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, what are some surprises that you've had by going through these episodes? You mentioned Kirk being much more of multidimensional than maybe he's made out to be in pop culture. But what are some other surprises you learned as you've gone through these episodes with that lens, that leadership lens, and looking at these shows?
Well, I think one of the almost maybe the most surprising but most expected ones is that it's not always the captains that are the real leaders and are the stars here. Like I just recently recorded an episode for Next Generation called Face of the Enemy. And it's Deanna Troi, who's the counselor on the ship, ends up on a Romulan vessel. She's in the middle of this huge, just like complex web of intrigue and everything. And she steps up and she's just a counselor on the ship. There's actually a whole storyline in Next Generation later on about how she wants to get into command. But watching these what you just consider your operations people or whatever step into leadership roles. And I say I'm surprised because when you think about Star Trek, you always think about the captains and blah, blah, blah. Where I'm not surprised, though, is in real life, right? At work, when we're leading our teams, when we're out there trying to inspire the people and build the people up, I would like to say, unleashing the potential inside of people.
That's really important. Yeah.
When we're doing that, like, they're the leaders.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. And kind of, and so I guess like it was surprising because it was unexpected, but it was exciting because it was validating of real life.
It is true. My wife and I commented about we were watching The Next Generation, the first couple of seasons, and Wesley, who ends up becoming an acting ensign. So, if you can imagine ensign being the lowest officer on a ship, an acting ensign is below that. So that's pretty low. But he ends up like saving the day on multiple episodes in the first two seasons. And, it's almost like going back to the submarine analogy where any one sailor, any one person could affect the outcome of the ship's performance, right? They can save the day. When we had an emergency, so we had a fire in the laundry, we ran to the fire, right? And the first person there, put out the fire, and then you would establish communications. But everybody knew we were all trained firefighters. We ran to the problem, and we depended on that junior sailor to get there and put out that fire because our lives depended on it. And there was Wesley Crusher, acting ensign, saving the day, and it was just that same going back to the submarine. Do you think maybe that what you've liked about Star Trek and the leadership lessons do you recall your submarine days? Is that part of the reason why there's a fascination there? Because it is a crew. You're in space. I mean, a submarine, you're sort of, you can't leave. You're basically underwater. It's very similar. Yeah,
it is. And in fact, I've joked a lot that like if we ever end up in the Star Trek world, those are all submariners out there.
They are,
right?
Yeah.
There's no, like, there's an escape hatch, but you're so far underwater, it doesn't matter. Right. And so, but I think it almost bothers me, right? Because you watch operations on the Enterprise or on Voyager, and you're like, that's not how it happens.
Right.
Right. And it's the little things. And I think some of this are pieces I've my wife and I were actually on a road trip here recently. We just had to get out of the house, and we're on the West Coast. So we're on I-5. And she's like, yeah, we're going to look for exit 133. And I literally say, exit 133I. Like, right? It's like, whoa, what am I? It's almost well over, or if you round it up, it'd be 30 years ago I was doing that.
Right.
And,
right.
But when you watch on the Enterprise and they're just like, make your heading this. And they're just like, aye, sir. Like, no, that's not.
No, verbatim repeat back. We
right,
require it. Right.
So this thing's got to get in my head a little bit where it's like, yeah, that's not, but it's cool, Jeff. It's not not real. Right. This is a show.
I think we were talking before the show too. Submariners have a very strong level of sarcasm too. So you don't see that so much on Star Trek, but you do get the sarcasm in your commentary, which I love, by the way. So maybe it's because I'm a submariner and I appreciate
right. Yeah. You're like, oh, I speak that.
I love it. So So if you kind of summarize, maybe some of the things you're learning from the watching the Star Trek and putting on these episodes, but also your experience, what would you say makes a great leader?
So I've actually defined this in 4 very distinct categories. I call this aptitude because everything has to be a cool acronym, right? That's how we function. Right. And I cheat to get my acronym. That's how dedicated I am to the cause. But it's aptitude, right? And so there's 4 pieces. A is someone who adds value in every interaction. When you're talking to somebody, you can't just have a surface level conversation. You need to get in there and add value to that person. And a good example I think of there is when I was working in professional wrestling. Somebody would go out for a match and they'd come back and all they want to hear is what a good job they did, right? But I'm trying to create a better show out there. And so I would tell them, yeah, that was garbage, man. Like you didn't do this, you didn't do that. Maybe a little nicer some of the times, but add value in that conversation. The second one is the P, someone who puts the mission ahead of themselves. And what I think of there is this is really what I like to think of as kind of the blame game, right? When something goes wrong as a leader, it's my job to go and take that shot, right? It's not my team member, unless they did anything illegal or unethical or anything like that. But 99.9% of the time, it's me that goes in there because the mission has to continue, and I am not critical to the mission on that. The third one where I really cheated was the best you have to offer is your authentic self, right? You have to, someone who's real. When my first, I guess you'd say, paid leadership position was a manager in the movie theater industry. And my boss was all about Mr. This and Miss That. And so I was Mr. Aiken and I hated it. I hated it. But I didn't know how to be a good manager yet. And so here's a little look into the psychosis of Jeff Aiken, but I almost created a character, Mr. Aiken. And Mr. Aiken knew all about FMLA and the break laws, through this and whatnot. And he knew those things. Jeff didn't have a clue. And over time, as I learned them, not only could I just be Jeff instead of Mr. Aiken, but I was dramatically more effective as a leader because I was able to bring my whole self to the game. I wasn't having to put a plastic face on and pretend to be something I wasn't.
I think the other thing I'll just add to that too, the authentic self, I see when people try to fake it, everybody knows it, right? And when they're trying to pretend, hey, what's going on, guys? Everybody's like, wow, he's
like,
kind of
kid. So
everybody knows it when you're faking it. So authenticity is, if you're trying to fake it, everybody is aware of it. So being authentic is really, I see it as a big issue. So
when I think about it too, and I stole this from somebody, I wish I could give credit. I don't remember who it was, but it's the problem of M&Ms, right? So M&Ms are the worst thing for your workers. Those are managers and meetings. All they do is disrupt work, right? But if you are authentic, if you're not faking it, I think that's such a great example. If you are just doing it, you don't have to fake it. When you interact with your teams, you're not going to be that manager disrupting work. You're going to be there adding value, putting the mission ahead because you're being your whole you're being authentic.
Yep.
And that brings you to the fourth one, which is somebody who allows others to thrive. Again, and it's the whole reverse breakup thing. When you get someone breaks up, they're like, hey, it's not you, it's me. It's just not working out. No, it's not me. It is you. You're all that matters here. And so I think you actually had a great tweet about this here not too long ago, where it's a leader's job is to give the credit and to take the blame, essentially, right? And that's allowing people to thrive. So when someone can do those 4 things, like that's how I define a strong leader. And then I added the tude to it because sounds better as aptitude.
I like it. Tude.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think it's really important. I like what you said there. Allow others to thrive. I mean, you're talking about adding value. I mean, this is really good stuff. So,
well, thanks.
And I was just trying to see my notes. I can't even read it. So yeah, puts the mission ahead of themselves. So one of the things I talk about in my my first book was the idea that, it's called I Have the Watch. And the reason being is this, when you have the watch, right, you're responsible, at least, when I was an officer, as officer of the deck or engineering officer of the watch, I was responsible for the mission and the people.
And the people.
Yeah. Yes. And I think this is one thing that people miss out on. So they think that, I'm I'm the manager of this organization. I'm responsible for the mission to make the numbers, right? But they don't see it as it's important that they have to be in charge of the people as well, or be responsible for the people. They think just the mission, and that's why it's easy for them to say, "Oh, we're not making our numbers, so I got to let 5 people go so I can make my profits." I mean, yeah, there's those circumstances when, you have to shrink the size of a business, but that's a last resort. But there are some managers that's their first thing they do. They see people as an expense, not as an asset.
Right. And they are such an asset. And I think that's the paradigm shift that needs to happen, where if my mission is to make money, right, and that's most organizations out there, I have the, I'll say, quote unquote, advantage of working primarily in the public sector, where my job is to spend money, not necessarily make it, right? But I think that when we can accept and embrace the fact that the best way to achieve that mission of making money is investing in our people, in unleashing, empowering, and supporting our people, profits go through the roof. I'll tell a quick story, if it's okay, where I did this in the public sector. I was given oversight of a program, not huge, 148 people in this program at the time when I was handed it, and they did some pretty important but basic tasks that supported the organizations. They received the mail, opened it, scanned it, electronically distributed it throughout the organization, and some other data entry and records management tasks. And so when I walked in, the prior leadership had been removed for creating a hostile work environment.
Oh wow!
Not good, and a lot of trauma with the people in the organization. And so, 148 people when I stepped in, they were failing to meet their service level agreements across the board. They had asks for more personnel to anybody that would listen. Within 4 months, I was able to reduce the head count to about 121. Eventually, we got the head count down to 84, all through attrition. People promoted or found out that we didn't lay anybody off, nothing negative. It was all celebratory and positive. We were same day, next day, exceeding our service level agreements across the board with less people. And we didn't do anything magic, right? I didn't get new technology. I didn't hire more management. What I did is I changed management's job. And I said, your job is not to watch the numbers. Your job is not to watch the work. Your job is to support and empower the people.
Wow.
That's it. We even changed our manager meetings, what we did weekly, where the report out wasn't our stats and our breakdown, but what have you done this week to support your teams? And within a 4-month space, we transformed our organization. I've now been there almost 4 years. And as an organization, we're facing tremendous budget reductions because of the pandemic. Oregon is a state that's dependent on an income tax. And hey, not a lot of income happening right now.
Not at all. Yeah.
So we were asked to make reductions because we've embraced lean methodologies, because we have recognized people as our most valuable asset and actively invested in those people. I have nothing to cut. And our budget committees have held us harmless from doing those cuts because they understand the value that we bring to the organization and that we've already gotten ourselves to be an efficient machine. So, I mean, it's a thing that works in the public sector. It works in the private sector. Our people are I mean, God, and I get passionate about this because it is, to me, it's just so simple and it's so easy. It's easy and it's fun to prioritize your people. It sucks to show up and look at P&L sheets and look at all this stuff and like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get? That's no fun, man. But working with people and unleashing people, that is awesome. And it will lead you to success. I mean, okay,
absolutely. No, absolutely. No, you're speaking my language because I really, truly believe in that as well. And, I think of what Jocko Willink says, there's no such thing as a bad team. It's just bad leaders.
Yes.
And I think that, you can have the same exact team. Basically, you switched leaders and suddenly you have this productivity gain. You're meeting your objectives and everyone's, the morale improves and suddenly things are good. And what have you done differently? Well, we focused on people instead of the numbers. And guess what? The numbers came.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
quickly.
That's what people can't understand. They say, well, if I put people first, then I won't get my numbers. Well, no, that's not exactly what happens, right? It's just, if you focus on the people, then they focus on the numbers. They focus on doing a good job, and they feel they're appreciated. They feel like, hey, my boss is looking out for me. They have my back. They understand. They have empathy for my situation. They understand the needs I have, and they're supportive of those needs. and I think that's really remarkable. I had one manufacturing plant I ran while I was out on the shop floor, and I saw they had a mallet, and the mallet was so worn down, it was just basically a little bit over the sides of the handle. And I asked him, I said, what is this? And he says, it's a mallet. I said, well, what's wrong with the mallet? He said, well, we've used it so much that it's worn down to the nub. And I said, well, have you told anybody about it? And he said, I was a plant manager. And he said, well, no, everybody's really busy and we don't want to, it's just a hammer. It's not a big deal. I'm like, it is a big deal, right? This is how they build the product, right? And they had this, what's left of a little hammer, and, but I think just being there and supporting and be able to give them the tools they need to get the job done and get the regulations and the red tape out of their way and unleash them to really do a great job and basically, get out of the way because they're going to do great things.
I talked about 4 things I used to define a good leader. Here's the simple 2. Someone who knows when to shut up and get out of the way.
I love it.
We're done listening to you. Get out of our way and let us do amazing things.
Yeah, I love it. That's really good. I like that. So what's next with the podcast? So you're going to keep doing this format where you randomly pick an episode. It could come from any one of the series and you're going to you watch it and do the show so that you just keep doing it every other week. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got it set every other week. It's a pretty tremendous lift to produce. I've been learning a lot more about production, and I'm getting my workflows better. Remember, we embrace lean methodologies or Six Sigma or any process improvement methodology. But yeah, going to keep on that format. Keep going. I've asked for input from people, and so far it seems to be working well. Doing the random generator keeps it kind of fun. For me too.
I like that too. I really do. Yeah, because you're not just going through the series. Yeah,
exactly. It's gonna present a couple challenges. I've already found. I just recorded an episode for the second episode of the 4th season of The Next Generation, which is called Family, and it comes right on the heels of probably the biggest cliffhanger in the history of television. I won't give it away, although it happened, in the 80s. But I even recommend in that one, I'm like, you should go back and watch these 2 episodes before you watch this episode. It's a ton of context, and I'm also including the new series Star Trek Discovery in my reviews, and that is serial. So the one series is one story. So I anticipate running into a couple, but I mean they're totally overcomable barriers.
Right
to the whole thing.
I think it's great to have a leadership lessons set in a context of a story. So you're actually observing, obviously it's fictional, but these characters in a sometimes stressful situation, complex situation, how do they work their way through it? And what are the leadership lessons? I think it's a really great background to be able to build a leadership podcast on. I think it's fascinating. And I think if you take the time and watch the episode, then listen to your podcast, I really do think you get a lot out of it. I know I personally do. So I think that's the best way to go through that. So.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks. I do in the episode try and walk people through, the plot and what's happening. But I agree. There's a lot of stuff I might gloss over just in the interest of time. My very first episode I did, my wife listened to, and no better critic, than the person who's committed to spending their life with you. But she's like, yeah, way too much on the Star Trek, not enough on the leadership. And I'm like, okay, cool. It's good feedback, right? And so you'll kind of see this like balance I try and do between them. And there are some episodes where, maybe there's not as much leadership, or maybe there's so much, you might not get as much of the story or as much as the leadership.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I'm not like a hardcore Star Trek fan. I just, I enjoy the shows, but I think you don't have to be a Star Trek junkie to really get a lot of value out of this. That's what I think. That's why I encourage, for those of you who might be thinking, well, I'm not really into Star Trek. Well, you don't have to be. It's just, this is the context in which these leadership lessons are being taught. And I think anyone can really appreciate that. So
I agree.
So that's really good. So how can our listeners connect with you, find out more about the Starfleet Leadership Academy podcast?
So you can hit me on all the social media at Jeff T. Aiken. I always spell it out. Jeff T as in trust, Aiken, A-K-I-N. And I'm on the socials. Or you can there's a great tool for podcasts I use called Podfollow. So podfollow.com/SFLA, Starfleet Leadership Academy. And that'll open up the podcast in whatever your preferred podcatcher is.
Okay, great. And I'm going to put all the links to the show notes in there. because I really do encourage all of my listeners to go check it out. Listen to it, subscribe. I think you're going to find it is a very well-produced show, a lot of good content, and I know it's a tremendous amount of work for you to put that together every 2 weeks, because once you listen to it, and it's hard to describe it here on the podcast, but go listen to it. You'll see the level of professionalism in that podcast. So I can tell you know what you're doing when it comes to podcasting.
Well, let me full disclosure. I'm just a student of the game, right? I no formal training here. It's important to me to create a high quality product for people. So I take the time to learn and do things over again, right? I think it was Andy Warhol who said, if you're not failing, you're not trying. Well, I tell you what, I'm trying.
Well, I think you're doing a really good job, and I really commend you for what you're doing. So thank you very much for being on the show, and thank you for your podcast, and thank you for sharing all your wisdom today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, John. Take care.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Till next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.